Hello and welcome to Managing Triggers to Build Healthy Relationships. As I mentioned, this is a workshop, so whether you're here live or watching on the recording, it's advised to have a pen and paper so that you can fully engage. And those of you who are watching live, I'd like to invite you to use the chat at various points. You can ask a question at any point, or you can share your exercises, the results of the reflections and questions that I'll be asking. I think you all know me, but very briefly, I'm Catherine Baldwin and I'm a love, dating and relationships coach. And I am the author of a book that you see behind me called How to Fall in Love. I host online courses, group courses, I coach one-to-one, and I host retreats. I haven't run a retreat for a while, but I will be resuming face-to-face retreats in the autumn in the UK and maybe abroad next year. So watch out for those. And I have been on my own journey when I say journey, I mean the moment I came out of denial about how I was treating myself, how I was eating or not eating or self-harming with food, how I was self-harming with exercise, with work, and with romantic relationships, and all relationships, actually. So 20 years ago, I started my personal development journey, my journey into self-understanding, self-awareness, my therapeutic journey, studying counseling and psychotherapy, receiving lots of therapy, attending lots of support groups, and transforming my relationship with myself, my relationship with my work, and my romantic relationships, so that I was able to form a healthy relationship and get married 4 years ago and maintain that relationship, which is one of the challenges, because it's not just about finding one, it's about maintaining it with healthy communication and self-awareness. And that's what this workshop is about. It's about whether we are dating, whether we are in relationships, romantic relationships, or whether we are struggling with other relationships, friendships, family relationships. I would like to support you to understand your own reactions and behaviors in relationships. And this, for me, as I said, I've been on this personal development journey for 20 years, and I have new insights every week, and I get really excited about what I learn about myself and how it can help my clients and how I can share it with others. And the work that I'll be sharing today, or the material I'll be sharing today, is relatively new to me, but has profoundly changed my understanding of myself and how I behave in relationships. And I do have to say that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, as we all do when we share knowledge. So I credit my therapist, Paul Sunderland, for informing me of so many amazing things, and also Pete Walker, who is an author and psychotherapist. I'll talk about him a bit later, but I credit them and lots of other people who have helped me along the way. So talking about triggers, you might not know that you're being triggered in relationships, or you might understand that you are being triggered in relationships, but you might not know why, and you might not know what to do about it. So we'll all be a bit different at different stages of our self-knowledge and of our development. And I hope the material today will help you whatever stage you're at. We'll have different levels of consciousness around this. And if I think back some years, I didn't know I was being triggered. I just didn't understand why I behaved as I did in relationships. My behavior, especially in romantic relationships, was crazy making for me and for the other person. It was push-pull, it was push them away, it was run away, it was judge and criticize, it was withdraw, it was anger. didn't understand what was going on for me or what was going on for the other person. And the same goes for my family relationships. You know, certain members of my family and friendships trigger automatic responses that I initially didn't understand. So what is a trigger? A trigger is an automatic response. It's like when something hits a nerve or touches a sensitive spot or touches a wound or stirs up a wound. That's when we are triggered. So you might feel it like pain or sadness, or you might react with anger, you might lash out, you might withdraw, you might feel small, you might feel sad, you might want to cry. It's kind of our automatic responses to other people, to their words, to their tone of voice, to the expression on their face, to their text, to their email, to their message. There are many ways in which we are triggered. So I want to look at the 4 main responses that many of us have to triggering situations. And I'll explain those to you. And I want to look at why we are triggered and how these triggers sabotage our relationships and potentially jeopardize, ruin, end our relationships or make them very difficult. And I want to give you some tools to manage yourself and understand yourself in relationships when you are triggered. And at any point, if you don't understand or you have a question or you need more explanation or you'd like me to pause or slow down, please say so. Just pop something in the chat. So somebody keeps popping out and coming back. The 4 main automatic responses to triggers are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I'm going to explain them all to you and give you examples. But bear those in mind because I'm going to ask you to try and figure out which is your primary, because that's helpful information. And I'll share a little bit about my primary. But fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Now, these are coping mechanisms that we acquired generally in childhood in response to challenging situations. So they became survival tools because we couldn't process our feelings, because we felt under threat, because we felt unsafe, because we needed to find a way to feel okay, to feel safe, to manage our feelings, to manage our pain. And some of you know that when I offered this workshop, I initially called it managing trauma triggers to build healthy relationships. Now, I removed the word trauma because some people don't identify with trauma, but I want to explain trauma is a huge umbrella, and many women and men and people who come and work with me have experienced some form of traumatic event or an ongoing traumatic experience in their childhoods. And I know that in my journey, I didn't relate to the word trauma until about 4 years ago. So that's kind of 16 years of personal development without relating to the word trauma. And trauma takes many forms. It could be abandonment or anything that feels like abandonment to the baby, to the child, neglect, or anything that feels like neglect to the baby and the child. It could be feeling unsafe. It could be feeling unwanted, unwelcome, feeling disconnected from the parent figure, emotionally disconnected. if you think, and I'm sure you all have small children in your life or know of small children, and if you think about a baby or a small child whose needs aren't being met, and you can think about someone you know, perhaps who is left for a while, or who is shouted at by an angry parent, or who is bullied, or who is told stuff that makes them feel unhappy. So these are all, to the small child, these are all traumatic experiences. And they get lodged deep in our subconscious as memories. So in my case, I would count numerous aspects of my childhood. Now I would count them. I didn't before, but now I would count them as traumatic. My mum had issues with alcohol. She used alcohol to manage her feelings, which means she was disconnected from herself and her feelings, which meant she struggled to connect emotionally with her children. For a child, that is traumatic, to be in the presence of a caregiver who isn't able to emotionally connect to them. It is also traumatic, experiences that I had of being faced with an angry parent as a small child, or a parent who leaves, or who dies, or who, again, is detached from their feelings. So these are all traumatic experiences. And I'm just going to ask a question, and you don't have to share, but you might want to. I just wonder how many of you relate to traumatic experiences in your past. Is it, and feel free just to say yes in the chat, or to share something, perhaps it's abandonment or neglect, and if you don't, perhaps you relate to challenging experiences. Or so if you just, and this is just to encourage you to use the chat and to feel less alone, and to connect with each other, because one of the wonderful tools that I'm going to offer later on to manage our trauma triggers or triggers is connection. So some of you have put yes, and I know some of you, I've worked with you, so I am able, from the work we have done together, to identify traumatic experiences in your childhood. And somebody shares became more aware, perhaps became more aware as a teenager than as a and then as a young adult. So it might be that we can identify things, perhaps in our teens or later, that were traumatic. But it's, if our parents are struggling to connect with us when we're in our teens, or if stuff is going on, it's likely it was going on in a similar, perhaps different way when we were younger. So it's pretty much guaranteed that people who come and work with me, or who follow my work, or who relate to what I'm talking about, do so because they connect with me on a deep level, and with the experiences that I have experienced and that I talk about, not getting our needs met in childhood. So that's a pretty simple definition. If you want to explore trauma more, I mentioned this wonderful author at the beginning, Pete Walker, and his book, Complex PTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. He has lots of definitions in the beginning of his book, many of which I imagine you will all relate to. But the term that he uses, just to clarify that, so he uses the term complex PTSD. Now, we all know PTSD, it's often post-traumatic stress disorder. It's often associated with war veterans. So for the war veteran, the experiences of traumatic events on the battlefield are lodged so deeply in the subconscious that when a car backfires in Birmingham, he thinks he's back on the battlefield in Vietnam. So he has a shock because it's deep inside. With complex PTSD, also known as developmental trauma, I personally have a similar reaction. So when someone shouts at me or is angry with me today, as a 52-year-old woman, I am immediately triggered back to when I was 7 years old and I spoke my truth to my mum and she shouted at me. And in that moment, because I'm a small child and I depend on my mum for my care and survival, I feel under threat and I feel like my life is in danger. So when someone shouts at me in the present day, I regress to childhood and I pick up one of my coping mechanisms: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So if someone shouts at me today, I might go mute or silent. I might lose my voice because I have frozen, because I am triggered back to the past. So complex PTSD and developmental trauma, they are phrases that describe the same thing. So if you think back to when we were little, these survival tools made perfect sense to us, or they were very useful to us. So, for example, I'm going to hide. I'm going to stay small. I'm going to stay quiet. I'm not going to be noticed. I'm going to shrink. I'm going to run. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to withdraw. I'm going to push people away. I think back to my school days, and I was both, I would be triggered both into the sort of fawn, people pleaser, nice, Miss Nice, Miss Perfect, do whatever you say. And on the other hand, I would fight. I would physically fight. I can just picture myself fighting this little boy. And well, he's probably the same size as me at the time, but I fought him. I physically fought him. And, you know, and we could say, well, you know, that's what children do. But in many cases, these are adaptive responses, survival tools. This is how I'm going to stay safe. This is how I'm going to belong. This is how I'm going to not get into trouble. This is how I'm going to be loved. So I'm going to talk about the different responses, and I'd just like you to listen and think about how which one might be your primary, or which two might be your primary, and how they might show up in your romantic relationships, work relationships, friendships, and so forth. So I'll start with fight. So the way fight shows up in different ways. It's about, with the fight response, I understand that my safety comes from power and control. And I know many women I work with have an issue with control, and it might not look like fight, but think about control. So my safety, or my sense of belonging, or my sense of being okay, comes from power and control. So I might fight myself. And I did that, you know, I criticized myself, I judged myself. And there's control in that, you know, if I could just get it right, and then giving myself a really hard time when I couldn't get it right. So if I can just get it right, and really being my own critical parent, criticizing, judging myself, And for me, the fight extended to self-harm, binge eating, compulsive exercising, other forms of self-harm. So I would fight myself, but I would also fight others. And when I say fight, I mean do something that creates distance between me and the person. So take dating, for example. You know, I would go on a date and I would think of 10 or 15 reasons to criticize or judge or find fault with the person I was dating. Big nose, white socks, lives in the wrong area of London, doesn't have a good career, don't like the way he eats his cornflakes, balding, you know, like nitpicking, finding fault, judging, criticizing. And what is the result of that? The result of that is distance. Like, I'm not going to get close to him if I am judging and criticizing and putting him down. And he's not going to want to be close to me because he's going to think, well, this woman's a right pain. I don't want to be with her if she keeps putting me down. So my sense of safety, and when I say safety, it's because my core belief is that relationships, love, intimacy, I'm not safe. They're not safe. I love and I will lose. I will feel trapped. I will feel abandoned. I will feel neglected. So I need to find my safety in relationships. So I find that through power and control, and I find that through fight. And how that shows up in my current relationship, in my marriage, not current relationship, hopefully my forever relationship, in my marriage is I can still do it. You know, we've been together for, I think I worked this out the other day, 9 years, and married for 4. And I have to catch myself all the time because I am creating distance. I'm pushing him away. I'm criticizing. I'm judging. You haven't washed the dishes correctly. That pan needs another scrub. Why can't you be more this? Why can't you be more that? I'm either thinking it or every now and then it's coming out of my mouth. And I see it. I see what it does to my relationship. I see it, that it creates distance. And that makes me feel really sad because I've worked really hard for this. So why am I now sabotaging it? Why am I pushing him away or giving him reason not to want to be with me? And it's because I'm still getting used to that feeling of intimacy and feeling safe. And it's likely that something else is going on in my life and I just resort to that old coping mechanism. So maybe I'm feeling stressed, maybe I'm tired, maybe I haven't had enough sleep, maybe I'm feeling anxious, and I manage my own anxiety by fighting the other person. So I'm gonna just pause and ask if you can relate to fight. If you'd like to share in the chat how this might show up for you, how it might impact your relationships. I'm just thinking about non-romantic relationships. I tend to be pretty good with my friends, but and you might also notice these coping mechanisms in others. You know, you might have people in your family who use fight towards you, like they get their sense of safety from power and control. So you might be able to see them in others. There's a question, is it also a learned behavior if one or both parents were critical? I absolutely think it is. We learn from what we see when we're very young. If we do to ourselves what was done to us, and then we often do that to others too. So I believe it is something that we can pick up from others. So yeah, someone shares they recognize the fawn, but also can run from situations. So that's flight. Never thought of myself as being a fight response, but I'm often told I'm very hard on myself and very self-critical, but can also be that way about others at work, especially. Yes. So being very hard on yourself. And I'll come on to flight in a bit, because I think that straddles both. But the self-criticism. And you might just want to think about, what does that do? What does that do to you? What does that do to your relationship with yourself? Because we all know that healthy relationships are based on a healthy, loving relationship with ourselves. So if you'd like to think for a moment about being really hard on yourself, if you imagine that there's a child inside of you, your inner child, and you're constantly berating her and being hard on her, and she's never good enough, what does that do for that relationship? How does that impact that relationship? Is she going to trust you? Is she going to feel safe with you? Just have a look at the other messages. Okay, that's a great point. Very important, which is we very often judge and criticize others for the same things that we don't like in ourselves. So if I am judging, criticizing my husband for not being, I don't know, dynamic enough, or not achieving his goals, or not being this or that, most often I have to look at myself and think, I need to take responsibility for myself and the things that I want to do. And generally when I do that, then the volume turns down on the criticism of him. And that is in my book. If you've read my book, you might want to look at, I think it's the chapter on dating triggers. If you haven't read my book, take a look, How to Fall in Love, but the chapter on dating triggers, which I think might be 6. And it's also in my Date with Courage, Clarity and Confidence group course, which I self-paced and group course, and the group course I hope to run in the autumn. So that will explain that a bit more. But generally, we are triggered by parts of someone else that remind us of ourselves. For me, especially, it was if someone was an overeater or a bit overweight, I absolutely despised them because I couldn't stand that part of myself. I had no compassion for that part of myself. And as I grew in compassion for those parts of myself that I didn't like, I am able to extend that compassion to others. Yeah. So someone sharing that it's helpful to see the judgment in dating. I mean, it's so common that in dating, oh, is he or she or they just not right for me? Don't like this, don't like that, rule them out. Now we want to be alert to red flags, but the judgment, what is it doing? It's creating distance. It's making it impossible for the relationship to work out. It's ultimately keeping you safe. Because I imagine for some of you, deep in the subconscious, there's a sense of relationships aren't happy places. They aren't safe places. Hard on myself to the point of bringing me to tears. Yeah. So this is when we come on to the tools, but the message here is around self-compassion and self-understanding. And it was only by being more compassionate with myself, not perfect at all, but more accepting and compassionate of myself, that I could be accepting and compassionate of others, especially that intimate relationship. Finding fault, finding fault with every guy I try to date. So with that, I obviously relate to that. Again, I think try and extend loads of compassion and acceptance and understanding to yourself, and try and see through the response. See it as a survival tool, a coping mechanism, because deep down somewhere there's a sense that relationships aren't safe, and you're trying to keep yourself safe. Focusing too much on outcomes, difficulty surrendering. Yeah, but getting better. So someone's talking about freeze and the brain fog. I'm going to come on to that. Okay, I feel like I don't always know what being hard on myself means, or just having standards and being honest. Definitely if we're bringing ourselves to tears, obviously that's being too hard on ourselves. I think I would ask myself, would I speak to like this to a best friend? Would I speak in this way to a child? Am I treating myself as a human being rather than a human doing? Yeah. Okay, so thank you for sharing. And let me just check the time. I am going to look at flight. So flight is my personal primary survival tool, coping mechanism. So when I think about flight, myself as a young child, I wanted to flee the situation, but I couldn't flee the situation because I'm small, I'm dependent on my parents, I'm living in this house, I'm too young to run away. So I will flee from my feelings. I will flee from reality. I will flee from my body into my head. So for me, flight involved getting high or numbing out on substances, sugar, carbs. Also getting high by not eating, under eating. I got quite high with under eating and over exercising. Alcohol once I started drinking, a bit of drugs. So fleeing reality, fleeing my body, fleeing the connection with myself, and therefore the connection with my feelings and the connection with my pain. And then when I managed to put down the food and the alcohol and these things, then I'm left with my work and my achievement and my busyness and my experience junkie and my FOMO. And importantly, with the flight, importantly, I'm left with the busy, obsessive, overthinking head. So I know I work with many intelligent, cerebral women, and we spend a lot of time in our heads, don't we? Trying to figure everything out, trying to get it right, trying to understand. And I was with a client earlier today, and how do I know if this person is right for me? I'm going to think it out. I'm going to obsess. I'm going to obsess. I'm going to think. I'm going to obsess. I'm going to worry. That is flight. And what we're doing there is we are managing our anxiety by detaching from our feelings, by staying busy, by rushing around, or by staying in our heads, in that constant train of thought. And whenever you get into the if only thinking, oh, if only I had a dog, my life would be better. If only I had a partner, if only I was thinner, if only I could fit into that dress. That is a way of flight, because it's not in the present, it's in the future. If only. And it's also in the past. If only I hadn't done that, if only I hadn't made that mistake, if only I'd said that. That is rumination. That is in the past. That's also a flight. So if only thinking past and future, and thinking when I do this, or when I get a dog, or when I get a boyfriend, or when, that's future thinking. So in all those scenarios, we are not in the present. We are in the past or in the future. So we are fleeing the present. And for me, that was one of my earliest coping mechanisms, to detach from feelings that I wasn't able to process. So mum is drinking, dad is leaving, parents are having affairs. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe around family members. I don't feel safe around the boyfriends who mum's bringing home. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel enough. Imagine, I feel anxious just saying all those things. So how am I going to manage that anxiety when I'm 5? I don't have the processing tools, and I don't have the adults around me who can help me to process my parents' divorce or the fact that all this crazy stuff is going on. So I survive by numbing, by avoiding, and by getting high, staying busy, overthinking. So can you relate to that? Can you relate to the flight? I mean, another flight in very physical terms is I basically escaped my childhood home to go to university, which was quite normal. But then I left the country at 23 and didn't come back for 10 years, apart from the odd holiday. So I went from the UK to Italy, to Australia, to New Zealand, to America, to Mexico, to Brazil, and eventually came back to London. Always thinking, well, running, fleeing from myself, from my feelings, from my family of origin, even though on the outside, you know, doesn't look too bad, but always fleeing and always looking, searching for myself. So can you relate to being busy, perpetually busy, overthinking, worrying too much? If only, when I'm this, present, avoidance of present, being in the future, being in the past. So feel free to share about that in the chat. Someone shares that despite years of therapy and work on yourself, still struggling with some of these things. And I relate to that, you know, 20 years on this journey. And, you know, I'm sharing this now because I still struggle with it myself, like overthinking, busyness, cramming, packing things in. If only, when. It takes time. It takes time, and yeah, and I'll share some tools in a while, but it takes time. And I think it's about continuing our journey. Feel like running in certain situations when getting overwhelmed, too many people, family dynamics, when feeling stuck for so long. Yeah, so this is a good one, like always looking for another course to do or another credential, climbing the career ladder, not feeling good enough, haven't achieved enough, feeling like there's something missing. If only I had a more supportive family, if only I didn't make that mistake. So when we're in if only thinking, I would like you to see that as a coping mechanism, as a survival tool. I would like you, and it's going to take time, but I'd like you to stare it in the face and see it for what it is. It is a survival tool to detach you from the present, to keep you away from the pain, keep you away from the true feelings. And I know many of you, especially if you've done work with me, you have got in touch with the pain and you have got in touch with the feelings. And I'll just share this. I mean, I shared this with my therapist only a couple of months ago. I said, I am absolutely in touch with the pain. I'm always crying. I'm totally in touch with the pain. And he said, I don't think you are. I'm in touch with the dramas that I create in my head. I'm in touch with the crises that I create for myself, with the worry and the anxiety and the rushing and I'm in touch with those feelings. But am I actually in touch with the core of the pain? And I know we're going quite deep here, but I have been in touch with that very recently, and it was hugely painful. I was in touch with a sense of hopelessness and helplessness that I felt as a child. And it was hugely painful, a sense of I don't belong and what's the point of me? But I survived it and I came through it and I grew from it and I learned from it and I came back stronger. So if you think like me that I'm totally in touch with the pain, I always cry, just ask yourself if you're in touch with the core or if you're in touch with the sort of pseudo feelings or crises that we create for ourselves. And the other thing is to notice that this thinking, it performs a role, and that is to detach us from the present. So the tool to use is when we're in if only thinking, or when thinking, when we're in the past or the present, it is to engage with the present. How can I engage with the present? How can I engage with my relationship or my friendships? How can I engage with the next step on my journey to a happier, more fulfilled life? How can I engage? So just think about that engagement. So those fight, flight, freeze, fawn are called the F types. Think about the E type, the engagement. That is one of your tools to counter these. And the sadness of the if only, especially if only I'd had a different childhood, we really do need to get in touch with the feeling that ship has sailed and it's sad, and we are left with the job of taking responsibility for ourselves. And there is some grieving to do, but it's also empowering. It's empowering. Okay, this is what I have. How can I move forwards? How can I stay in the present? How can I engage? Okay, someone shares about having done all the flight things, but felt like they were actually in fight mode. And there is an overlap. So someone shares they took flight the day they were told that their mum had died at age 10, locked myself in a bathroom and didn't come out. It was safe in the bathroom and I feel safe on my own now. It's a real challenge to let anyone in. So that's brilliant awareness that you sought safety through flight, and that there's a direct correlation with today. And I'll come on to this, but just while we're there, the tools we want to use, which many of you know, are to connect with the frightened child within, to show her so much love and compassion and understanding, because that was a traumatic experience that she suffered. Give her what she didn't get at the time, understanding from others, guidance, comfort, support, a feeling of safety, a feeling of trying to make sense of this. Notice how the search for safety is showing up today, perhaps by dating unavailable people, finding fault with people, pushing people away. See it for what it is. Get support around you and move forwards with courage, compassion, gentleness. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. Okay, that's a great example. The endless scrolling on the phone or watching things when stressed out, rather than dealing with a situation. Overthink at worry at. So we have a new flight mechanism, which is the phone, the scrolling. And when we're doing that, we all do it. But when we're doing that, if you can pull yourself away from it, how can I engage? How can I engage with the situation in front of me? How can I engage with my life? How can I engage with the present? So yeah, not realizing that all the thinking was a type of flight. I didn't realize that until a while ago. I thought I was just being clever, smart, trying to figure it out, using my intelligence. But actually, I think it's in many cases, it's a coping mechanism. Fleeing to food and TV and overthinking. Used to do lots of courses. How do we avoid not meeting unavailable people? So that's quite a big topic, but briefly, we make sure that we are emotionally available ourselves. And we do that by understanding some of these responses. So if we are pushing people away, fleeing, fighting, freezing, fawning, not showing up authentically, then it's likely that we ourselves are not emotionally available. And we therefore are naturally drawn to people who are unavailable because they feel safe, because a relationship can't actually flourish into true intimacy with that person. So for me, it's always about looking inside ourselves. And I do have lots of resources that can help with that. I have courses. I have a course called How to Find an Emotionally Available Partner, I think it's called. And also my book is really helpful with that. But hopefully I can come back to that a little bit at the end. Thank you for the question. I am going to move on to freeze. And this, I have a client I'm working with right now, and her primary response is freeze, which was formed in childhood around experiences of angry parents. It could be angry siblings, it could be angry teachers or people at school. And the belief that we have formed from those experiences, people equals danger. People are unsafe. And therefore we go silent, we go numb, we go quiet, we hide, we shrink. And some people might sleep. I've never been anyone who could take myself to bed for hours, but I know some people use sleep as a comfort and as a freeze coping mechanism. And, it can be very comforting if you think, you're warm, you're cozy, and you're safe. But in that moment, we're not engaging with life. I mean, I'm all for having naps if that's something that we need and we're able to do. And I wish I could nap. I'm not very good at napping. But if you notice that you're shutting down through sleep, then that's not healthy. It means we're not engaging. And, the problem with freezing is we might end up in inauthentic relationships, or we might end up showing up inauthentically in relationships, which means it's an unhealthy relationship. So if I am not able to express myself in a relationship, if someone shows a little bit of anger or annoyance towards me and I totally freeze, or if I feel criticized and I freeze and I go mute, or if somebody steps on my boundaries and I freeze, then I'm not showing up authentically. I am not giving the other person the chance to see the real me. And that builds a false relationship. That means the other person is in love with someone who isn't you. They're in love with the frozen version of you, not the real version of you. So it's really important to try and be authentic in relationships. And for those of us who are struggling to know if the person is right for me or not, the best way to find that out is to be authentic and real and honest and true in our relationships. I know that takes courage. and it takes time, but that is our fastest route to clarity about whether the person is right for us or not. So you might want to share, do you freeze? Can you relate to freezing? Do you lose your voice? You know that expression, you know what happens when we're having a chat with someone, or someone confronts us, or we're having a conversation, and we can't think what to say, and then we go away, and half an hour later we think, oh my gosh, and we kick ourselves and like, I know exactly what I should have said. Now the reason is, in the moment you have been triggered into your trauma, and basically your brain has reduced to the size of a pea. It's literally shrunk. You have gone into brain fog, your brain has frozen because you have been triggered into your child, into your wounded child. And then half an hour later, you walk down the road, you've got some movement, you've relaxed a bit more, and then your brain goes back to its normal size, no longer the size of a pea. And then you think, oh, I know what I should have said. That would have been so wise. And this might happen in work, in friendships, in relationships. So brain has reduced to the size of a pea. And show yourself compassion for that, because it's what happens. It's what happens. So can you relate to freezing, numbing, sleeping, going quiet, going silent, not speaking your truth? Feel free to share about that while I just take a moment. Big time, someone says. So I sometimes get stuck thinking, how will what I have to say be received? And the uncertainty and unpredictability of the other person's response, I find it hard to voice my needs clearly for those reasons. So that is the issue, because we are expecting or anticipating a response, and we are imagining that the response might be hostile or challenging or confrontational. And in that moment, it's about reminding yourself that you're an adult, that you're not a child or a teenager, that it's important to be authentic and real, and that you will cope with the response. You will be able to manage the response, because you are strong and you've done a lot of work on yourself and you have grown. And although you might react, I remember I was dating a guy in my 30s. He lived in Washington, went to visit him, and I went to spend a day with my friend in New York. I got back to Washington, and he gave me a hard time for going off to New York. And I felt that he was confronting me, and I had a massive response, and I ran to my bed and ran to his bed and burst into tears because I felt anger. And this is slightly different, but I just remember how at the time, I wasn't in my adult, I was in my child. I ran away and I cried. Now in my adult, I would say, well, we communicated about this and you said it was okay that I went to New York, and I hear that you're upset, but let's talk it through. I would be in my adult. And that's the way to try and have these conversations, to try and voice your needs. Now, when I speak to certain people in my family who trigger me, I really have to do the work first. I really have to maybe write down what I want to say. I have to do some breath, deep breathing, maybe bookend it, which means like calling a friend beforehand and say, I'm about to have a conversation with this family member. Have the conversation, call someone afterwards. I've just had the conversation with the family member. Just share it with someone else so that you're not alone. And notice these things for what they are. They are triggers. And I think I've shared before that when I was trying to get an article published in Red magazine, ringing up the editor, so frightened, even though we were both journalists, both had equal careers. I was literally on my knees and shaking and making the phone call because she was an authority figure. I was scared of rejection. I was scared of humiliation. I was scared of abandonment. I was scared of being, humiliated is one of my triggers. So we need to try and get ourselves back into the adult. Okay, not being honest about how I feel, for fear of rejection, abandonment, criticism. Absolutely. The problem is we end up in inauthentic relationships, not being true to ourselves. And, I think we get to the tipping point where, and this happened to me, where the prospect of the pain that I might experience from speaking up is less than the pain I feel from not standing up for myself. Does that make sense? So when I don't stand up for myself, now that I have this information, now that I have grown, it is painful to me when I don't stand up for myself. Now, it's frightening to stand up for myself, but ultimately, the pain of not doing so becomes greater than the fear, and that's the tipping point. And then I tip over, and then I stand up for myself. But we don't have to do it on our own. We do it with support. Some of you are working with me. I'm gonna offer some support for August. So the key is to not do these things on our own. I mean, all the things that I have done in my healing journey, I haven't done on my own. So I freeze if someone's rude. And then afterwards get angry. Freezing is sometimes useful as it is a political environment. So yeah, these are adaptive responses. And if it works, if it still works, if it's still useful, if it stops us from like throwing in a hand grenade in the moment, then perhaps it serves its purpose. The key would then be to remove ourselves from the situation, work it through, write it down, work it through on paper, and then work through the feelings that come up, the anger and so forth. And it's also, this stuff is also about practice. Practice makes almost perfect, because we'll never be perfect. But the more we voice our truth, come out of the freeze, the easier it will be next time. Okay, so if someone important or an authority figure gets angry, get scared because as a result of having an angry dad. So that is about self-compassion and self-reassurance. When we're small and we have an angry dad, it literally feels like our life is in danger, because A, he's big and we're small. B, we depend on our parents for our survival. The human infant instinctively knows that they will die if they don't get the care that they need, instinctively. And so when we're little and we're not getting the care that we need, we actually think we're going to die. And that's why some present day experiences feel so painful, because it feels close to life-threatening. Some of you might have been through breakups that have felt so painful, or some of you might have, like me, physically shook when you've had to speak your truth. And that is because you are remembering, your subconscious is remembering that this experience felt life-threatening when I was a child. And I'm going to talk through the tools, but again, it is about getting back into the adult, talking to the child, talking to yourself, reminding yourself that you are not a small child anymore and your life isn't in danger. And also talking this through with others who can bring you back into the present day. Okay, someone says they feel drained and overwhelmed and struggle getting out of bed in the mornings. So that suggests some freeze and perhaps also the result of flight. So flight types are perpetually tired. That's me, flight type. I'm not perpetually tired anymore because I have some balance, but perpetually stressed, perpetually tired, and perpetually busy. But yeah, the freeze of getting out of bed in the morning, it might be that it's all too daunting, it's too difficult, it feels too much. And that will be how the child might have felt. She might have felt hopeless. She might have felt helpless. It's all too much. It's overwhelming. So that is about tiny steps. I'm not a child anymore. What little step can I take to move forwards, to engage? And I will just share, in case it's helpful, you know, I hope you're benefiting from this workshop. I really have to pull out the stops and persuade myself to engage with my work and with you and to share my knowledge, because I tell myself that it's too hard and nobody will want to hear, and I'll be rejected and I'll be exhausted. So, you know, I've just had a difficult few months of really deep processing, and I'm happy to be out of it, which is why I'm here doing this again. But, you know, if I didn't keep taking little steps every day to engage with my life and engage with my relationship, my marriage would no longer be working because I wouldn't be engaging. I'd be fighting or fleeing. And B, my business wouldn't be working and you wouldn't be receiving this because I would have given up. And, you know, I'll just share a really sad, you know, my dear mum, who started out full of life, whose life then got her down, and her life shrunk. It just shrank and shrank, or shrunk, what's the word? And, you know, I am the daughter of that mother, and I have the potential as well to give up, to fall into hopelessness and helplessness, and to let my life shrink, and to isolate, and not to do this work, and not to connect with you guys, and not to deliver, and also to wreck my relationship. So I have all that potential in me. And it is about a courageous choice every day and getting a lot of support. And that's a little bit of an aside, but I hope it's helpful because, you know, as a child, I felt helpless and hopeless, and that's still with me. And sometimes it can feel too much. So I need to live my life as an adult, not as a wounded child. So taking time out is good. Crying is crying a sign of freezing? Possibly. Crying can be a good thing, can be a sign of processing. But we want to make sure we're crying about the core feelings rather than pseudo crisis. And I don't say that to diminish what we might be crying about, but I have recently learned that I create a lot of reasons to cry in my life to avoid crying about the actual thing that is painful. Shame can be linked to freeze. Yeah. Yes, shame is very heavy. So you can imagine it sort of pulls us down. Does freezing kind of hide being authentic, and sometimes from the person who's frozen? Yeah, so freezing, yeah, we're not showing up authentically if we're freezing. So we are hiding. Yeah, I hope that answers that question. Yeah, so the confusion, someone who shares about confusion. So mother got angry or annoyed, but then pretended it didn't matter and didn't clearly explain how she felt. So I felt very confused and anxious. So there's a line, I probably can't find it right now, but that my therapist gave me, that we need our mothers to tell emotionally coherent stories of their own lives. So we need our mothers to be coherent in order for us to feel safe. And if they're not coherent, and I absolutely relate to that, to someone who at some point might be, in my case, might be loving and present, the next moment absent and angry, and then not even acknowledging that they were angry and pretending that nothing happened. That's all very confusing, and it's not coherent, and we therefore don't feel safe and we feel anxious. So that makes perfect sense. And when we make sense, I hope it helps to know that you make perfect sense, because it means that we can understand ourselves and we can see where things come from, and we can change them. Thank you for being honest. Someone says, it's very powerful. Thank you for being here. Yeah, and thank you. I would like to know more about the flight response and how this links to always being busy, if there's time. Briefly, and then possibly I can come back to it. But so we are fleeing. So if you think that the flight type manages their anxiety by always being busy. So we're constantly moving, filling our calendars, and not getting in touch with the core feelings, the real reasons why we're anxious. Like we might be anxious about, oh, here's a great one with me. I really struggle to buy footwear. Like I buy 2 sizes, neither of them fit, I send them back. And I spend quite a lot of time feeling anxious about the trainers that I've bought and whether I'm sending them back or not. So my anxiety is around the trainers, but that is a coping mechanism. My true anxiety goes back to my childhood of, am I safe? Am I okay? Will I survive? And I need to get in touch with that anxiety rather than, have I got the right trainers, or am I in the right job, or my boss said something, it might be nasty. I feel, it's about getting to the core, and the flight keeps us in our heads, overthinking, busy. Yeah. So I hope that makes sense, but pop another question in if you'd like to know more. Yeah, for me, indecisiveness is part of my flight response. It gives me a really convenient way to spend hours of my time trying to figure out if I've got the right trainers, or if I've said the right thing, or if I'm dating the right guy. Yeah, for me, it's part of the flight response. So someone shares about work, someone got very angry with them, feel awful in the moment, and then didn't defend myself and said, thank you for the feedback, cried a lot afterwards, but tried to understand where they were coming from. I'm proud of myself for changing my pattern. Okay, so you changed your usual reaction. And I suppose I want to make sure that you, I hear that you chose a reaction in the moment that was in your best interests. And that is the key here. The key is to understand what is in my best interests here, because we don't always we want to know that we can tell the truth and be honest and authentic, but we don't have to run around telling the whole world how we feel if it's not in our best interests, if it's not gonna be in our best interests. Yeah. So it sounded like you acted in your best interests. Well done. So the awareness comes. So I'm going to move on to fawn. So much information to cover. We'll be here till midnight, but we won't, I promise. But fawn is classic people pleasing. You will know this, I'm sure. And in fawn, when we bow down, subservient, people please, our safety comes from alignment with the other person, alignment with the other person's point of view. And we put other people's needs first, and we abandon ourselves and our own needs. So this is a classic in codependency. Codependency is a very broad term, and many of these responses fit into codependency. Controlling people, complying with people, not speaking our truth. These are all codependent, but the most sort of well-known codependent response is to people please. Whatever you say. I don't have a voice. I don't have an opinion. Your needs come first. I'll put you first. So you might want to just say if you relate to that while I move on to my next bit. Okay, I want to talk about the tools that will help you manage some of these triggers in relationships. I'm just going to look through my notes. Okay, just two other things. Gold star, people pleaser. Yeah, I can relate to that. But I'm sure this is changing. Yeah, someone shares they used to fawn a lot, but more free of that now. I just want to clarify how these responses affect our relationships. All relationships, romantic relationships especially, but all relationships. So if we are in a fight, I'm criticizing, I'm judging, I'm criticizing myself. So my relationship with myself, which is the most important one, is affected because I am always fighting myself. So consider that I am another person. I have another person inside. I'm always fighting myself. That creates distance between myself and my younger parts inside. It also creates distance with the other person. So if I'm always fighting the other person, there's a gap between us. There's distance between us. And that's, for me, really convenient. If I want to sabotage my marriage, then I just keep criticizing and judging him and fighting him. And in the end, he'll think, well, this isn't nice. Why would I be here? Or he might fight back. And so that's going to wreck everything. With the flight, I'm totally detached from my feelings. I'm totally detached from the present. I'm always running and rushing. And I don't have time for myself. I don't have time for relationships. I don't have time to build intimacy with people. I don't have time to engage, and I'm not present, so I can't engage. So, I have lots of women in my circles, not necessarily clients, actually more friends who haven't done all the work that you women have done, who don't have time to date, That is a choice. It's a choice. It is a choice, isn't it? And often it's a subconscious choice because dating, relationships, intimacy feels frightening. With the freeze and the fawn, the issue there is one that we will eventually build up a sort of resentment of ourselves. It will bubble up, and it might suddenly come out. If we suddenly speak up, it might come out, if we don't speak up initially, but eventually speak up, it'll come out quite loud and strong. We'll eventually build up this resentment towards ourselves, and it has to come out somehow. In the past, if I used to if I had gone mute or censored myself or not spoken up in a relationship, I would feel really down on myself and resentful of myself. And I would normally then binge eat, harm myself. So it's a cycle of self-harm. So both the freeze and the fawn, they lead to this sense of resentment towards myself, self-harm, but also they lead to inauthentic relationships. So relationships based on a persona that I am presenting to you. Oh, I don't have needs. I don't have wants. I'm not going to tell you my truth. Oh, you can speak to me like that and I will say nothing. I will go quiet, I will go mute. And that is an inauthentic relationship, and it can't last. So we have to engage. We have to find ways to be honest and true in order to build authentic relationships. And it doesn't all have to come at once. And it isn't a crisis if you're not being 100% authentic all the time. It's just about little steps, moving forwards, being a bit more honest. And there's another piece of work that I won't go into right now because I do want to share the tools, obviously, but there's something that you can do yourselves at home. And it is about exploring when and why you picked up these coping mechanisms. Now, some of you have already shared this, perhaps angry parents, perhaps a sense of abandonment, not feeling safe. But think about the experiences that you were trying to survive, trying to get through, trying to cope with, the feelings that you were trying to manage. Now, I'd like you to do this in your own time, because they are the experiences that you will need to bring to the surface, connect with, and heal. Grieve first so that you can heal them. Now, if you're with me in one-to-one coaching, this is the work that we do. If you join a group course, we do this work together. It's important to, I think personally, I think it's important to have support to help you we want to bring things into the light, out of the darkness, into the light. These experiences, these memories, we want to talk about them, journal about them. So writing them down is really helpful. So that's some work that you can do after this workshop, tomorrow, another day. Write down some of the experiences that you were trying to survive and the coping mechanisms that you picked up at the time. So I want to talk about the tools for managing these triggering moments. And if you do relate to a lot of what I've spoken about, you might want to look at this book. Oh, actually, his website is brilliant. It has a lot of information on the website. Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving by Pete Walker. If you look up Pete Walker's website, which is something like petewalker.com, some of this information is actually on his website, so you don't need to buy the book. So I'm not going to give you all the tools, but I'm going to give you the ones that I feel are the most important, that are working for me. So I'll come back to some comments in a minute. So your first important tool question is, when you feel triggered, which could be, I feel angry, sad, repelled, repulsed, I feel like I need to go mute, I feel scared, I feel anxious. And often these are exaggerated feelings. That means you are triggered. So when you are triggered, I want you to ask the question, am I in a flashback? So when I say flashback, I mean that you are flashing back to an earlier life experience of the same dynamic. So, boss is angry with me. I feel extraordinarily triggered, anxious, and I pause and I go, okay, am I in a flashback? I think I'm in a flashback. I am flashing back to the moment when Dad shouted at me when I was 5. So that is the first question to establish that you are in a flashback, that you are flashing back to an earlier memory of the same experience, the same dynamic. When you go mute, when you go silent, I am in a flashback. I remember that time, for me personally, I remember that time when I said to my mum, I wish you wouldn't drink so much. She responded with anger. I was a small child. I decided in that moment, never again would I speak my truth. It wasn't safe. I also decided that I couldn't trust my feelings or my intuition. So when in present day, I have a sense of I need to go quiet, I can't speak my truth, I can't set a boundary, it's not safe to set a boundary, I am in a flashback to that moment when I spoke to my mum and it wasn't well received. Can a flashback be from a traumatic experience in adulthood, or is it always from childhood? I believe it can be from adulthood as well, from any age. So yeah. For example, when I lived in Mexico, I was mugged with a knife on one occasion and with a gun on one occasion. And then when I moved to London in my 30s and used to get cabs home from town, I'd spend most of my time looking behind me out the window of the taxi or feeling anxious or not trusting the taxi driver because I was mugged in taxis in Mexico. So that was only a few years difference, but it was a traumatic experience, which I had not processed, and probably still haven't, to be honest, because I just went to the bar and got drunk when I lived in Mexico. So, you know, that was an adult experience. So yes, I believe they can. So notice something's happening in your body and in your brain that's kind of automatic. It's kind of knee-jerk, like you're not in control of it. And that is, you're triggered, that's your brain has gone on to autopilot, or it's shrunk to the size of a pea. So am I in a flashback? And then the next thing is to speak to yourself, adult to child, adult to inner child, or adult to adult, and say, you are not in danger. And it is to validate. So one thing that happened for us in childhood is often we weren't validated. So to validate your feelings. Okay, I understand that this feels frightening. I understand that you feel afraid, but we are not in danger. We are not a child. I am the adult. I've got you. And I'll take care of you. And we are not in danger and we will survive. You might want to set a boundary. So, and it can be a holding boundary. Say you're kind of in confrontation with someone or in argument and you feel really triggered. You might just say, you know what, I'm struggling to continue this conversation. I need to take some space. I'm going to leave the room. You know, I have a client whose partner speaks very aggressively to her. And we've been working on ways for her to set a boundary, as in, I'm not able to speak to you when you're raising your voice like that. So think about boundaries. So that could be, I need to physically remove myself from the situation, or I need to set a boundary about how people speak to me, about what is acceptable. I'm aware of the time, so I'm gonna run over a little bit. If you need to go, you will receive the recording. So I'll try and wrap up by 10 past. Definitely the recorded bit, especially because my dinner will be ready. Okay, so you might want to physically remove yourself from the situation. So think about reassuring yourself, speaking to yourself. Now, other really good tools are sort of getting back into your body. So, and if you might want to do this before you face one of your triggers. So before you speak your truth, you might want to do some long, deep breaths. So that sends a signal to your body that you are safe. So if you think about short breaths, which I spent most of my life breathing short breaths, I'm anxious, I'm on high alert, something bad's going to happen. But if I take a long in-breath and an even longer out-breath, then I am sending signals to my mind and my body that I am safe. We are safe. We are safe. We are safe. Ideally, you want to avoid using those other very effective soothing techniques that I used to use, used to be effective, like sugar, chocolate, carbs, coffee. You want to try and avoid using the numbing or the stimulating things. And I know it's hard, but think about breath, think about movement. So if you move your body, if you open your body, if you stretch your body, if you do some yoga, think about moving your body, because that will bring you out of the trigger. Journaling, relaxing, something that's soothing. So many of our problems originated, and I haven't got time to go into this fully, but originated when we weren't soothed as children. As in, we need to feel soothed by, our parents like mirror us, they look into our eyes, they say the right things, they exude calm, peace, care, and many of us didn't receive that soothing. So we want to find ways to soothe ourselves as adults, because without being soothed as children, we don't feel safe. So when we're triggered into not feeling safe as adults, we want to soothe ourselves. So that could be cuddling a stuffed toy, hugging a pillow. If you've got a pet, it could be stroking a pet. That's very soothing. Another thing is to stop the movie running in your head. So that's like the catastrophizing and the crisis thinking, okay, so-and-so's just been angry with me. Okay, in my head, I've just created this massive movie where they never speak to me again and they disown me, or the relationship is over, or so we want to stop the movie. And that applies both ways, after the event, but also before we face one of our fears. So try and stop the movie, the sort of projection, this is going to be awful, because you will know from your own experience that things that we think are going to be awful often aren't. And we want to do that work that I suggested. So think about your early life experiences or your later experiences and how they triggered your responses. And you want to try and grieve those early life experiences. And we do that by connecting with them, by writing about them, by sharing them with others, by crying about them, by feeling validated, validating ourselves. So the more we grieve those early life experiences, the more we turn down the volume on the trigger. Now, I'm not saying we will never feel triggered. That might be an impossible goal, but we will turn down the volume on the trigger, and we will be better able to manage our response. And as I said in some of my emails, the goal is to act consciously rather than react subconsciously or mindlessly or automatically. And the other thing that I've talked about is engagement. Engage. So to get out of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn, we engage. We engage with ourselves, we engage with our feelings, we engage with the other, we engage with our lives. What's the next thing I need to do today to move my life forward, to feel happier? One thing that if you're a fight type and you're in relationships with others, you might want to bottom line, as in stop doing. You might want to stop criticism and judgment and swap it for appreciation. So I'm not saying you appreciate stuff that isn't good, but fight types tend to struggle to show appreciation and always find things to criticize. So I've really had to do that in my relationship. I have had to absolutely, and this sounds a bit silly, but I have to stop going around pointing out that the dishes need washing again, or this isn't right, or you haven't done this, and or I wish this. I have to stop doing that. And I have to remember to show appreciation for the good stuff. You know, I appreciate you has become a very common phrase in my vocabulary. And actually, it has also been returned by my husband. And we didn't used to say that. I appreciate you. So that takes us out of the fight and into engagement. So it's very hard to stop self-judgment and criticism. That is very true. I wonder if we can try the same with ourselves. I appreciate you. We can say it, and we can also show it. So I'm often saying to clients, how can you celebrate yourself? How can you appreciate yourself? And this was said to me for years and years and years. Did I go and buy myself a gift or a massage? Or not very often. Did I write it in my celebration book or achievement book? Not very often. But these are the ways that we counter the self-judgment and the criticism. So I am going to wrap up. I'm going to share something about some support that I'm offering in August. I am going to switch the recording off. And actually, as I'm wrapping up, if you do have any burning questions that you'd like me to answer on the recording, please pop them in the chat. I will do that. I will then switch the recording off. And then if anyone wants just to stay to have a few minutes chat, please do. The other thing I'd love you to do is share any feedback in the chat about whether you found this helpful or not. That's helpful for me. And that also helps me, other people to find this particular video that I will pop up on my website with a, that I will, what's the word, sell. I will sell on my website. Okay, so we've looked at what is a trigger. So those exaggerated responses, those strong feelings, automatic responses. The four main categories: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And I've been through all of those. And often I hope I've helped to enlighten you on some of the ways they show up. And we've looked at how they show up in our relationships, romantic and otherwise, how they sabotage our relationships, how they lead us into inauthentic relationships that cannot last. And we've looked at where they come from. And this is some work that you're also going to need to do yourself. Like, where did they form? How did I learn, or why did I learn these survival tools, these coping mechanisms? Where did they come from? And then the tools, some of which are, am I in a flashback, or I am in a flashback? Okay, how do I get myself back to the present? I show compassion for myself. Perhaps I remove myself from the situation. I breathe. I move my body. And one point about something like meditation or yoga or all the grounding exercises that we always suggest that we do, they will help you. Now, sometimes in the 10 minutes meditation we think, well, what was the point of that? But if you do that every day and keep doing it, you fill up your tank, you ground yourself, you become calmer, you change your neural pathways. And that means when a trigger happens, you respond with more calm, from a more grounded place. So that's why it's not just about meditating 10 minutes before you deliver the presentation. It's about doing it every morning, or doing your yoga, or doing your Pilates, or walking in nature, or doing your journaling, because that educates yourself. It lowers the volume on those responses. Yeah, the key is to get back out of the child response, or out of the automatic response, out of the subconscious response, into the conscious adult response, the emotionally intelligent response. And I'm going to leave that bit there. I'm going to come back to the comments in the moment. I am just going to share that in August, let me see if I can, I am going to run in August. Let me just see. Oops, sorry, not that. I'm going to run this. Can you see this? Summer Love and Life Support. I'm going to run it for a month. Some of you did my 14 Days of Love, which was a group that we ran in February, an online community. We ran it on Telegram and we had a Zoom meetup. And I'm going to run during August a supportive community similar to that. If you don't know what Telegram is, it's like WhatsApp, only it's more private because you don't have to share your phone number. So my intention with this is, as I said, I've had a difficult few months, but I'm back and I really want to engage with you. And I know many of you need and want support, and I want to offer support. It's good for me, it's good for you. So through August, this will include 3 Zoom sessions, and the Telegram group, and you can be part of a Facebook community as well if you'd like to be. And it's basically, as I've written here, bring your life struggles and your dating dilemmas, bring your tears and bring your fears, bring your worries and your relationship woes, celebrate your successes and cheer for your sisters. You can bring, I will lead with themes, but you can bring dating questions, relationship questions, career decisions. You can bring anything that you need support with. And the idea is to create a supportive community, which hopefully we could continue in some form going forward. I'm experimenting with different ways of serving you. So there are dates and times here. I'm going to put this in the link in the chat, but I'll also send it in an email. So you have all the details and you can read about them. And there is an early bird price of £25 for the month, which is excellent value, if I do say so myself. And that's available till July the 25th, and then it's £35. So you don't need to decide right now. You've got time, but have a think. The Zoom calls will be part recorded like this. So there'll be a recorded element that you'll be able to catch up on. And there will be, and then the Telegram group, which worked really well on the 14 Days of Love. I know some of you did that and enjoyed it. So I will send that round tomorrow. And now I'm going to go back to stop share. So let me just see if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer. Pop them in the chat, and otherwise I will switch the recording off. Let me just see, there was a comment. Someone said that there wasn't much space in family life. The youngest of some noisy people, so struggling to find voice within family. Would love to learn more about how to deal with flight responses. Okay, so we can dig deeper into that. Thank you for the kind comments. More about using the tools and examples. Okay, that's great. So someone shares that they recently set a boundary around the way someone was speaking to her, but then made me feel like I was overreacting or being too sensitive, which was another trigger for me and made me angry and annoyed because it felt belittling. Feels like a no-win situation. Okay. So you tried appreciating her, but she doesn't always do the same. So this is a long relationship, best friend since the age of 8 or 9, and hopefully there's a way through. I mean, it is, you know, we want to keep being real. If you set a boundary in a healthy way and spoke your truth, then that is the right thing to do. Then we want to manage the next trigger. about feeling belittled. So we need to work through that. What does that remind you of? Is that a flashback? And sit with that. And then we need to do it again. We need to do it again. We need to practice it and do it again. And then if it always turns out with the same result, we need to think about whether this relationship, it works for us, or whether it works for us in a different way. Maybe we just can't go as deep as we used to, or maybe we can't be as close as we used to, which is sad. But often when we develop emotionally, relationships shift and change. But the key is to not lose your voice, to keep speaking up. Yes, you can tell your friends about the August support experience. Okay, you're welcome, everyone. I'm going to finish the recording. Thank you for watching on recording. Thank you for joining live. I'll switch this off. If you want to stay around, please do.